Greetings once again. Welcome back to Indaba, Africa. Today I'd like to talk about an event that occurred last week in Carlisle, Pennsylvania at the Army War College. That event was the African Alumni Symposium from the 9th to the 12th of March. It involved 40 African professionals from across the continent, every corner of the continent. And it was specifically an annual event that takes place in the United States, in which we invite graduates, alumni from the Army War College, and in this case, this year also the Command General Staff College of Fort Leavenworth, to come back to Carlisle to network with professionals, other graduates, and to discuss timely topics of interest to the broader defense and security community. Now, this is a series of events that the U.S. Africa Command started hosting about a decade ago. And it's supposed to be an event that takes place every year. 1 year, the Army War College hosts the event, and then another year, the Naval War College and the Air War College. Unfortunately, for the past 2 years, neither the Navy or the Air Force have held the event. So this year, U.S. Army Africa, once again, who's the main host and the folks who plan and execute and conduct the actual event, put together the speakers and invite all of the participants and take care of their travel and everything like that, all the logistics, and set things up. U.S. Army Africa, once again, was the host along with U.S. Army War College. So here we are in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. For me, personally, this is my third event. I was invited when I came back from Ethiopia a few years ago to be a speaker and panel member up in Rhode Island with the Naval War College for that event. And then a couple of years ago here in 2017, I was a panel member and a breakout session moderator or group leader at the event that occurred in Carlisle while I was still on active duty. As a retiree, I was asked to come back this year and contribute to the event. It was quite heartwarming to see a number of my former students, many of whom have moved on to the flag ranks, become officers or admirals and such. And it was also interesting to see others whom I was unfamiliar with and learn a bit about them as well as we discussed timely topics. It was an event that lasted Monday through Friday, and we also had 1 day with a field trip of sorts, and that was a battlefield visit to the Antietam battlefield in Maryland, the site of one of the bloodiest single days of conflict in the United States throughout our history. So, with that said, let me talk specifically about the event that just took place. It is apropos. The topics that we discussed at this event with guest speakers. And so the way this works, let me explain, is there's a plenary session in which the topic is introduced. Typically, a speaker or speakers sit on a panel and discuss their experiences, their views on a subject of interest. And from there, we have a breakout session in which one small group leader leads a group of folks. In my section, we had a lot of Francophone members, probably because of my Francophone Africa experience and ability to speak French. I presume that's why they set up that way. But also coincidentally, about a third of the participants in my breakout session were my former students from the War College. So it was especially interesting. We also had participants from the state partnership programs from the National Guard. And in my breakout session, that included North Carolina, Wyoming, and one other. It's slipping my mind at the moment. But the topics for this year's event were the following. And as you'll see, they were apropos given the current world events. So we had the 21st century challenges for leaders. We also had the second plenary session, developing leaders through institutions, leading in a multinational environment, and civil-military cooperation for senior leaders. Now, if that's not apropos and just a matter of good fortune, I don't know what is. In the interest of full disclosure, these were also the same subject areas covered in the recent Africa Land Forces Summit, which was held in Ethiopia, sponsored by Africa Command and U.S. Army Africa. They covered the same topics with the chiefs of land forces across the continent who went to the conference. That's been going on also for a decade now. I was a participant in the very first one, which took place in Chantilly, Virginia, back in 2010. May 2nd, I believe it was, 2010 is when it started. So let's talk about these topics. Challenges for 21st century leaders. So for strategic leaders, what are some of these challenges might be? Well, a number of the things we discussed in this were some of the different things that leaders must address as a strategic leader. One of which was the question of diversity. What is genuine diversity and is important? For some folks, the focus on diversity is about equaling or leveling the playing field for past injustices. For others, it's about getting the widest diversity of views and experience to achieve the optimal outcome. And so where do you find the balance between those two? This is a question that I think is fair, and in the discussion it was quite illuminating for me as well. I tend to be a person that comes down on the side of true diversity is diversity of thought. And you don't want everyone thinking the same way. You want someone who's an outlier who can contribute and make people ask the hard questions rather than simply everyone going along and being sycophants. So that's, to me, what's been true diversity. Diversity of thought, diversity of experience, which brings people together. But diversity of appearance, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of religion, diversity of thought, all of that plays a role. For some folks, that's important. In the context of many places in Africa, it's a fair question. If you have a country in which a minority ethnic group controls the political scene and others are excluded from governmental positions, from accessing the business community or participating in the security forces, that's a very unhealthy situation for the country. It has to be representative of the country as a whole. That's a fair argument. One would hope that the people that are brought into such a diverse organization have the ability, and that always is the question about diversity of thought and experience versus diversity of appearance. Sometimes diversity of appearance, in fact, may be appropriate. We also talked about the complex challenges that face strategic leaders, and can it get any more complex or challenging than the current situation with Wuhan corona, COVID-19 virus spread around the globe? The hysteria that's taking place all over the planet is not shocking, but it can be disturbing at times. And so how do strategic leaders deal with such exigencies, such contingencies, such black swans, if you will, these unpredicted, unexpected events? Well, that is definitely something that is food for thought. And it's not something we actually came up with solutions to. We discussed the context of it and how it impacts life around the world for strategic leaders and for those who follow them. So the next topic I'd like to talk about is the concept of developing leaders through institutions. Now, what are we talking about here? In the military specifically, we're talking about professional military education for the most part, things like staff colleges and war colleges and peacekeeping centers, those sorts of places where our professionals go to get a professional education to talk about topics that are of national security interest for those around the world. Now, some of the challenges with these is that the smaller countries find it difficult to fund, staff, maintain such institutions. As a consequence, you have only a handful of war colleges in Africa. What is the impact of that? Well, the vast majority of African militaries have long been forced to hold back the very few slots they get for invitations from foreign partners like France, the United States, United Kingdom, India, China, for only a very small number of their officers. Consequently, a small number of senior officers get the education that they really need to become effective strategic leaders, or even operational leaders in many cases. So that's been a long-standing challenge. One problem with that for Africa is if you send your officers to the UK, to Canada, to the United States, Australia, China, India, these are very different military doctrines, very different political systems in many cases. And these officers come back having been inculcated in the experience and the doctrine and the political system of the country that hosted them. Now, that's not necessarily bad, but if your staff consists of one officer who's a graduate of the Carlisle Institution, the Army War College, another who's been to Australia, one who's been to Canada, one who graduated in India, another who graduated in Nigeria, they potentially have very different views on how to approach things and take very different tactical approaches to problem solving or just even identifying problems. And that's a challenge for a lot of African militaries. You often have these conflicting doctrines from these different sources. So what's one way that folks can overcome this in Africa? Well, one very useful way is something like a cooperative institution. The recently created G5 Sahel Defense College, which is located in Nouakchott, Mauritania, takes the members of the G5 Sahel community and it sends its officers there to attend a war college. All of the members have agreed that that is the equivalent of war college, whether they go to London or they go to Nigeria or they go to China, they accept it as the equivalent. And not only do they get more officers trained by pooling their resources and sharing the expense of staffing and funding such an institution, but these are 5 countries that work hopefully very closely together in their fight in the Sahel against extremists. And so this will give officers firsthand experience with peers who are also senior leaders so that in future they potentially can work more effectively together. So that was a little bit about developing leaders in institutions. We also talked about leading in a multinational environment. That can be very challenging. We were fortunate to have General Rodriguez, the former commander of U.S. AFRICOM. Plus, in our group, we had 3 officers who had extensive experience working in UN and African Union missions, and the context of a multinational environment. How do you lead? Must the force commander be from the troop contributing countries, or can someone come in from the outside? There are merits to that, and there are disadvantages to it. And that was one of the topics of discussion. We also talked about the importance of equity and fair treatment, so that you do not give the impression that one force is better or treated better than others, and that there's consistency with how the force commander does things. Operating in a multinational environment for a senior leader is a very challenging situation, and we talked about that quite extensively. So, the last part of this I'd like to talk about is civil-military cooperation, and this is a very apropos topic given what is going on around the world today with this COVID-19 virus. So we have a situation in which the military is being called upon to help assist civil authorities across the world, particularly here in the United States. New York and California have both called out their National Guards to do different things, and we can expect to see more of that going forward as the days pass. So, some questions about civil-military cooperation that came up in our conversation. How do you do it? What's appropriate for military? Some militaries are expected to do things far beyond the normal expectations for what a military is supposed to do. We would normally expect other civil authorities to have responsibility for that. And I'll use the case of the Botswana Defense Force, which I call the 911, the emergency center for all of Botswana. In the recent past, the Botswana Defense Force has been used to fight forest fires, to deal with flood relief, to do anti-poaching operations, to team up with the Botswana Police Service during the holidays, to do joint patrols with the police and military, to tamp down crime so that people are better protected during the holidays. These are non-traditional roles for military, and they raise challenges. There are legal challenges and there are structural challenges. In Botswana Defense Force's case, the military is not given additional budget to accomplish these things. As a consequence, readiness can suffer. Forces are not training together on their actual missions so that they're competent to execute national security missions when they come up. But on the other hand, at the same time, by the other token, militaries in Africa, one could argue that they often should have a different role than simply national defense. Part of their purpose should be to augment civil authorities and help civil authorities out, because oftentimes it is the military that is best equipped, or the only institution that is equipped to do a task. Now, that's fair enough. When it comes to anti-poaching operations, that was certainly the case in Botswana 2 decades ago in the 1980s, when the government called upon the BDF because the Wildlife Service was not armed, was insufficiently manned, and could not stop the poaching of wildlife in Botswana. So the BDF was called in. They developed tactics and techniques and doctrine to deal with this, and they became very effective at it. But the question is, here we are 2 decades later, why is the military still the institution responsible for this mission? Why not the Wildlife Service? Why not the police? That's a fair question. At some point, you reach saturation with what the military can and cannot do, and we may see that here very shortly in the United States, with the military looked upon, both the active and guard components looked upon to respond to Wuhan COVID-19 virus. So that's just a summary of the African Alumni Symposium, which took place here in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, from the 9th to the 12th of March, 2020, in which senior leaders from militaries across Africa came back here to network and to discuss these apropos topics. And the folks got out just in time as the flights began to be canceled on their way out the door, and got home to deal with the situation in their own countries. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in once again to our broadcast. If you like this video, if you have ideas for another video, please send them to me. I'm happy to entertain them. If you are enjoying the videos, please feel free to subscribe. It's still free. It's a free subscription. And our videos are something to put a little bit of effort into. So if you like them, please give us a like. Everybody likes a like. If you don't like it, feel free to put some comments out there. If you feel it goes the wrong direction, just let us know. Happy to help. And I look forward to the next broadcast. Thank you for your time, and hang in there. We'll all get through this.